My name is Dani B. I created the Crowned in Purpose podcast to share the journey that I'm on, along with my guests, on finding our purpose through Christ. We will discuss the complexity of life routines, kids, work life, and family responsibilities, as well as bring light to how our routines are impacting our one-on-one time with Him. Our goal on this journey is to be intentional with our time with God, as well as create life balance to achieve our full potential, spiritually as well as personally. The foundation of this journey starts with Matthew 6:25. But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. New episodes will premiere every Monday, so please listen, share, and rate as you take this journey with me. I am Dani B, and you are crowned in purpose. Welcome to the Crowned in Purpose podcast. I am your host, Dani B. Happy New Year to you. It is 2021. Hello, God is good. We are able to see another year. We're able to press on through another year, and God has given us the ability to pursue our purpose and seek Him. Because I'm going to bring you more guests this year who will continue to share their story, their journey of how God has truly led them to living out their purpose. So today, without further ado, you guys, I have another guest. His name is Dontaye Carter. He's the founder and CEO of Carter Media Group. He is a devoted husband, the epitome of a girl dad. I'm telling you, she's phenomenal. He's great. And then more importantly, he is an advocate in the community who is fighting injustice day to day. Dontaye Carter, welcome to the Crowned in Purpose podcast. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well. Happy New Year to you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Listeners, I can't stress enough, Dontaye and the Carter Media Group have been all over Georgia, sharing the story of multiple people as we get into this historical moment of the runoff election here in Georgia, which is global news. But we're not just going to focus on that today, because truly I want you guys to know how God has really moved in his life, truly living out his purpose and is blessing those around him.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's going to lead us into our conversation. Dontaye Carter and Carter Media Group. Those two names, especially here in Atlanta, Georgia, are known for our advocacy in our community, being the voice to those who have been silenced by injustice, and more importantly, the bridge that continues to mend society through sharing people's story. Tell the listeners about the day purpose found you and propelled you into Carter Media Group.
Yeah, purpose found me 4 years ago. I was working as the spokesperson for the Fulton County DA's office, largest district attorney's office in the state of Georgia. And, 4 young men, ages 14 to 16, were on trial for murder. And they were accused of murdering a white business owner here in Atlanta. And, I just remember hearing the victim's mother take the stand and her saying that, my son came to me in my dreams and he said that you have the wrong people on trial. And remember the courtroom just going up into an uproar, the judge ruling a mistrial and telling the prosecutors they need to go back and figure this out. And, it was, for me, it was just such a wake up call because I've seen When They See Us, and I've seen the documentaries of people who were wrongfully convicted and subsequently released, decades later. But I'm talking about actually being hands-on, being able to see these young men. It really tore me up, and it tore me up listening to the prosecutor explain to the DA, just what happened, like for me, that was difficult. And it was really life altering for me. The fact that so many people had dropped the ball in this case. It wasn't just the police, their investigators. It was the prosecutors, their investigators. So many people dropped the ball. I just remember just feeling like there needs to be more that's done. There needs to be somebody on the other side that can really help to elevate these stories and force people to just think, is this person really the guilty person? Is this person really the person that did it? I remember just listening and just hearing about the DA asked the prosecutor, well, all these boys had cell phones on them, right? What happened? Did you see which towers these boys' cell phones are pinging off of? And they hadn't. And when they went back and looked at it, these boys weren't in the area. And it's something that the defense attorney had been shouting from the mountaintop the minute the trial started, the minute the investigation started. And so you've got these 4 young men who I don't even know if they fully understood the magnitude of what was going to happen to them if they were found guilty. And for far too often, this is what happens to young Black and young brown men. Like, they don't understand the magnitude because they're sitting here and they're trusting the criminal justice system. And they're saying, you know what, at some point, it's gonna, there's going to be this revelation that we weren't the ones that did this. But it doesn't always work out that way. And fortunately for this case, it did. But it was just such a wake-up call. It just reminded me that this system, as much as it's working to keep our community safe, there has to be a group that holds it accountable, that makes sure that that we don't fall into this situation of arresting somebody just to solve a case, right? That we make sure that we have the right person. And I bring that point up because I worked in television news for over 10 years. I worked as an anchor, reporter, executive producer. I've heard police officers say, I don't care who did it, as long as somebody's going down for this. And that's the wrong mindset to have. Like, we need to ensure that the people that we're arresting are the people that the evidence leads us to. We can't say, oh, this person was 2 blocks away. No, being 2 blocks away, regardless of how close in proximity they are to the crime. Like, if this isn't where the evidence has led you, then you know what? We need to reevaluate what we're doing. And right now, that's what I'm fighting to do. I'm fighting to ensure that these folks are reevaluating what they're doing. I know a lot of these folks, and I know a lot of what I'm doing is making a lot of people feel very uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, I just can't lay my head down on a pillow and know that I know these injustices are occurring, and I remain silent, and I'm not allowing my actions to be a response to my faith and what I believe needs to be done.
That's big, because I think, the listeners come from different places of the country and we're all different races. And I think it's so important for people to hear that particular dynamic, because what we have in a society is where people say, well, no, it's not going on, or you guys are overreacting, or, and when you're able, to your point, to see it in front of you, it changes you. But even where his mother said, hey, you have the wrong people up there, even her pain, her disbelief, it was an amazing thing. But it is true. We are facing that in our society. And even though people sometimes have a comment of, well, we're past that point, they're not always in the courtroom to know that that's true.
Well, what I was just going to add is I would even challenge that thought of, are we that far past, right?
Right.
And the reason why I say that is because I didn't even know this until a few years ago. I'm the first person in my family to be born in the United States of America with the right to vote.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And so if I'm the first person in my family to be born with that right to vote, when that church was bombed in Alabama that killed those 4 little girls, my mother was alive back then.
Right.
Like, all these things happen. My parents lived through that. They may have been young, but they still experienced the trauma that's associated with those crimes. And so to say we're this far removed, it's like, if it takes a courtroom or a certain jurisdiction 20, 30 years to reverse a wrongful conviction, that these things just don't change in 50 years.
Right.
You know that it takes longer than that. And so to dismiss what we're feeling and what we're experiencing and to say that it's in our head, don't gaslight us, right? This country was founded on slavery, and the people that were used to be enslaved were Black people.
Right.
the foundations of this country were built on our backs. And so to tell us that, oh, you're thinking, no, we're not thinking too much. We're keeping it in full perspective, right? And by full perspective, we have to understand how the role that the criminal justice system plays in this.
Dontaye, thank you so much. And you brought up some great points. I do want to kind of go into how do we have those courageous conversations, especially about race and injustice in America. Sometimes it's frustrating for people. Sometimes different races, when we all come together, it becomes defensive. But really talk more about why it's important to have these conversations and how to have them. Because we all have to come to the table because humanity is on the line.
And it's so funny. So I want to backtrack just a little bit, right? I think what really helped me with all of this, with understanding, I really believe education is where you got to start. And when I say education, I'm not just talking about the school system. I'm talking about really understanding the history of this country. There's a book called Brainwashed by Tom Burrell, and he's a media strategist. And so he breaks down how for the last 400 years, there's been this campaign against Black lives that have devalued Black lives. And he breaks down everything from the Sambos to the lynching, all about how all these instances played a factor in where we are now. And the problem with people is they don't want to have this conversation in its context. I mean, yeah, what you're saying, you might have some points in 2020, but if you don't address what led us to this point where we had millions of people in the streets in every major city around the world, not just the US, but around the world, you have to look at where we are. I mean, the level of accountability for racism is so loud that Great Britain is releasing the names of every person that participated in the transatlantic slave trade in Great Britain. And so folks are asking a question of, oh man, well, what does that mean for the US? I mean, what do you mean? I mean, if they put it out there, you're going to figure out who was doing what over here. You know what I'm saying? Because those folks that did this stuff, they did it together. And I think the biggest thing, like when I look at this, what helped me out the most, right, was when I was hired to help the attorneys that were working with the families that were going up against R. Kelly. And I remember when I first got the case, he hadn't been charged. There was just so much that was going on with it. And I remember, like, I was sitting down, I was talking to my wife, and she said, well, before she responded, she was just quiet. And it was like, her silence was just uncomfortable. And she was silent after I asked a question of, like, I got this case on my desk. I don't even know how to charge for it, babe. I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about that. And she was just silent. And I said, babe, are you good? You good? What's going on? And she said, at some point, women, especially Black women, need our husbands, need our uncles. We need our fathers, our cousins, all the men in our lives. We need them to act like they see that there's a problem, because there is. And you having a Black daughter and struggling with this case, she said, like, it's alarming to me, like, to take accountability for this. And that's what it comes down to, accountability. Yeah. And she was spot on, and it was an uncomfortable conversation that she and I had. And the fact that I come from a single parent working class household and I couldn't fully understand that. Like, I'm ashamed to even admit that, but I'm grateful that she had the love to say, I got to let this brother know what's really going on. Because, like, when people ask, how was I able to do certain things? Like, you don't do certain things without being aware that there's a problem. Once my wife helped to educate me and she showed me where I could find the resources to educate myself on what was going on, like, it opened up a whole new world to me, right? Because not only were crimes committed based upon the way the laws are written now, but the laws that are written now to protect women against rape and sexual assault aren't sufficient. Like, if you really wanted to protect women, why not have women write those laws? You know what I'm saying? But they didn't, because it goes back to this system of we've been devaluing. We've devalued Black people. We've devalued women. You know what I'm saying? We've devalued immigrants. And that's why I keep saying the message of this is about the value of lives, because you see that where these crimes are being committed, where there is no accountability, it is because of the value of life. I want to make sure that folks understand that when it comes to these young Black boys being shot and killed by police, like that, I am going to be a sounding board. I'm not going to be quiet because this is an epidemic. And you can't tell me because these guys are in the hood or wherever they came from that there's a reason for them being like, there's no reason for this. If a kid is running away, you don't shoot him in the back. There's no law on our books that says it's okay to shoot somebody in the back, even for cops. And so the more and more that I started to understand what my wife was saying, the more and more that I started to understand the laws of this land. And the more and more I started to realize that, guess what? When these laws aren't sufficient, we can change them. Like, it changed the way that I saw this world. Like, I'm not going to tolerate these things. So if these laws that are supposed to protect us aren't sufficient enough, guess what? We got to vote some people out of office and get some people in there that understand our life experiences. And I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm going to have this conversation, this courageous conversation, but I'm also going to have it in context, because that's what I start to realize when we're talking back to your point about people that don't look like us. Right. A lot of times they're not having this conversation in context. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it in context. We're going to talk about it in a way that is going to bring the humanity back to my life. Because, I just realized this year, I just found out this year, my family's been in this country before the foundation of this country. Like, we've been here, and the fact that we've been here for so long and we're still fighting for justice, like, to me is absurd. And it's going to take people who are bold and who are willing. And I think just having the opportunity to go into federal court to fight for people's rights with the attorney that represented Dr. King and Rosa Parks, and he was the strategist behind this, one of the strategists behind the civil rights movement, being in those places. I mean, the dude's 90 years old, like, just being there with him. And I mean, for me to see somebody like him at 90 years old, still giving folks the business, like, it just changed the way I see this. And, one of the things that I asked him is like, what would you tell somebody like me to motivate me to really stay on this path? He said, find something that's wrong in this world that you live in right now in the United States, and take it apart. He said, I made it my life's mission to take apart Jim Crow segregation. And he said, I destroyed it. He said, I destroyed it. And he said, but there's still so much that's wrong that's going on right now. And he said, it's going to be people like you to look at this system. We need to take this apart. We need to fix this. We need to fix that. Because if we don't fix it for us, there's no cavalry coming in here to help Black folks. You know what I'm saying? We've got to be able to say, you know what, this government's designed to not just work for people who don't look like us, but to also work for us. And we're going to stand up and ensure that accountability is here, that justice is here, and that the value of life is present.
That's the thing where, even looking at, for example, where we're dealing with the race in Georgia for the Senate, and there's been all this, different conversations had. And, that is the truth, where we have to be able to really stand up for ourselves, for our community, because, hey, this may feel uncomfortable, but I know it's not right. I have to speak up. I have to say something. But I love the advice that he gave you. Find something in this world and pull it apart. And then, more importantly, educate yourself. Listeners, if you're not African-American and us having this conversation makes you uneasy, educate yourself. Because I find a lot of times when I do have conversations with people who don't look like me, they don't understand. And when you give them, like you said, context, when you give them education, then it becomes, because it hasn't impacted them, it hasn't affected them. And I remember even having the opportunity, because I know you talked about Black and brown. I have a young lady who I'm really close friends with who is Mexican. She's straight from Mexico. And she goes, Daniel, do you know that if one of my sons get pulled over by the police, they will detain them and send them right back? They have 3 strikes to get a ticket. That means speeding. That means, or any type of offense from a traffic violation, and they could get deported back to Mexico.
Yeah.
And when she told me it was 3 strikes, I was like, but you're talking like a ticket? Like little small things that you haven't killed anybody. You haven't done anything. I got 2 speeding tickets the other day. I couldn't believe it. They caught me on the camera. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm down to 1. If it was, if I were in their shoes, And it's crazy. And so I love that you touched on those things and that you're continuing to go in that fight and have those conversations with others who don't always look like us, but then also to still saying, I'm going to tell our story and let people know that it's not that far gone. It's not that far removed, and to educate. So we're going to shift a little bit, right? Because I know earlier I said, man, you're such a girl dad. You guys, you don't understand. Dontaye, his daughter, I think she may be a newscaster too, because she's always present. And I absolutely love it. I'm like, there goes his co-host, his co-anchor. She's so cute, you guys. So I just have to give her love. She's so adorable. But tell me and tell the listeners about the importance of your daughter being present as you're living out God's purpose for your life, where you're out here advocating for the community, for African Americans, for the justice system. But baby girl is watching this. Tell us about that importance with her being there.
You know, I think it's extremely important. And I say that, you know, from two folds, right? From the fact that my father wasn't present in my life. And I know what the loss feels like. And I know the lingering feeling that it can leave you with. But I also know that in order for us to really build strong children, we've got to be a part of their life, right? And in order for them to understand following purpose and walking in faith, they've got to see it. You know, I love in the Bible how Jesus always says that he knows his father's business. You know, and I want my daughter to know my business. I want my daughter to know what I'm about and the value of it. You know, it was, you know, the last 2 months, Thanksgiving, Christmas, you know, just being out, being a part of food drives, toy drives, and having her there. I want her to understand that that life is hard for a lot of people, but I want her to understand that that we can also be those people that make a difference. You know, one of the things that I love, just kind of going back to my wife's story, she has an ancestor that fought in the American Revolutionary War, and it's so inspiring to me because he won his freedom fighting in that war, and he moved his family as far north as they could go. And still be in America. So upstate New York near Niagara Falls. But that ancestor, his grandson, right, ended up getting into Yale University in the middle of slavery.
Wow.
Became the second African-American in the United States to graduate with a medical degree. Went on to lead the medical unit in the Civil War, a Black guy. And so Yale's like running around. They got his face on everything. They're always talking about him. And I'm like, you know, that's my wife's like great grandfather, you know, and, you know, but I see the impact that it had on her entire family. You know, she's a doctor. She owns her own practice. Her brother's a doctor. He owns his own practice. Her father was the first Black veterinarian in the state of North Carolina, owned his own practice. Like when you make these God moves, like it changes generations. And but the only way this stuff works is if the kids see it. You know what I'm saying? They've got to see it. And so we talk about why my daughter is always there is because I know the importance of her seeing this and what it's going to do for her life. And I want to ensure that whatever she does, you know, she doesn't have to follow my steps. She doesn't have to follow in her mother's steps, you know, but understanding that walking in purpose and walking in faith is instrumental. You know, for me, I felt like, you know, when I was kind of just doing my thing, when I was bothered by everything in the world, but not doing anything about it, mentally, life was a lot harder for me. But the minute that I decided, you know, I don't just want to accept the status quo. I don't just want to accept these things that they're telling me. You know, I remember I told a friend of mine that Trump's entire presidency, I've been uncomfortable. And he said, no, you weren't. Stop lying. And I just remember sitting there thinking, like, who are you to tell me what impacted me? Like, right. For one, you're not Black, and for two, you're not living this experience. You know, you can't tell me what made me uncomfortable. But I want my daughter to know that if there's something in this world that makes her uncomfortable, change it. And I want her to know that she has that ability. There's nobody out here that can tell you what you can and can't do. You know, I think back to, you know, the women in the Bible. I look at Esther and how she saved her whole people's lives. You know what I'm saying? By just following God, you know, and it baffles my mind that, you know, in society, we can place a certain value on women and what we think they can and can't do. But if you look at the Bible, we've always seen women doing just astronomical things. You know what I'm saying? Amazing things. And I want to be that father that does not stop my daughter from achieving her goals. You know, I want her to see that, man, whatever I want to do, it's obtainable. I can do it. And I want her to see me do it. I want her to see her mother do it. And I can't wait for the day that she sets off and flies and does it herself.
That's amazing. And just knowing that, because I didn't know that about your wife and her family, because that's amazing. And then just to see that lineage play out into her life as well, and then giving your daughter the ability to see two powerhouses in front of her and really not know where she's going to go next, but knowing the foundation is solid is so important. And that goes into one of our next questions that I have for you. So when I was reading more about the company, you know, Carter Media Group, I saw OWN, OWN, which is a framework you created in helping attorneys own their story. Tell the listeners about what that means and what it stands for, and then the importance of knowing your narrative.
Yeah. Simply put, for me, OWN is about ensuring that we own our stories, that we own our voices. I came up with a little acronym for it. You know, O is for original, W is for work, N is for network. And I did that to show people that, you know, it's taking your original stories, your original work, and using your network to put them out there, put them on display, because you never know who you're going to inspire. You never know who you're going to encourage. And you know, that's a lot of what I do on my social media platforms. A lot of people are like, man, you post too much, you do this, you do that, you do. But, you know, it's always funny because I'll sit down with somebody and they'll know what I want them to know, you know, before we even get deep into the conversation. They'll know what I'm about. They'll know what I stand for, and they'll know the type of difference that I want to make in this world. And for me, those are the things that matter. You know, it's the change that I'm out here fighting to create, you know. And I think one of the things that made me really think about it is, it was one of the Koch brothers when he passed, and Fox News called him a billionaire and an activist. And I was like, man, how are you a billionaire and an activist? Like, where does that work? I never thought these two things could go together. But, you know, he was a billionaire and he was an activist for his community. And it just reminded me that the things that I find important, I got to fight for, you know, and I've got to build a company where I can start to employ people who look like me, so that we can not only be able to make that social change, but that economic change that's going to drive this thing for years to come as well.
It's so important, especially in the climate that we are in today, for African Americans to know that you have a voice. The one thing I want the listeners to know, because you've shared so many great stories, I want them to connect with you and Carter Media Group. I want them to be able to know more about, you know, who you are as an individual, how the business, it continues to just truly show up in situations that are, they're life-changing. I want them to be able to have the dialogue with you, especially if you go live. I love when Dontaye goes live. I'm like, got a notification. I'm signing on. He knows. I'm like, I got something to say. Let me say it. Okay. But I love it because the group of people that end up on your live, we're all different. Men, women, Black, white, Hispanic. I've seen it all in the comments list, but I love it because everybody's vulnerable enough to even say their ignorances, right? Vulnerable enough to put out what they thought they knew and then get educated, right? And then be okay with, got it. And I love it because they walk away enlightened. And so that the next time that someone who may look like them or doesn't look like them, and they say the same thing, no. Let me tell you what I found out. Hey, let me tell you about this book I read. And I think that's where America has to go, even after the Senate election, which is tomorrow here in Georgia. And Dontaye has been everywhere around the city. I promise you, truly getting people out to vote. Let them know where they can connect with you.
Yeah, they can follow me. I'm on every platform, Dontaye Carter, DONTAYE, last name Carter, except for Instagram, it's PR_, and that's the letters P and the letter R _ Carter 03. and Carter Media Group, as well as is on every platform. And so, yeah, stay connected. I think the biggest thing for us is to just stay informed. I think that's, we're in a day and age of information. It's hard to hear about something and not be able to fact check it via Google, right? And so
Right.
even for me, there's just so much that right now I'm just consuming at a very fast rate. And I was telling my wife the other day, I was like, man, like what I've been learning, if they had put in a book for me as a kid, I promise you I would have had a 4.5 GPA, because it's stuff that's changing my life, that's changing the direction of my life. Finances, it wasn't until I sat down with my uncle, like I didn't even know that you could pull out a life insurance policy on your kid. He was telling me what a lot of the wealthier folks do. They'll take out life insurance policies on their kid. They'll get these $1 million policies put on the kid. By the time the kid's like 18, they'll have access to $250,000, and so on. And a lot of times that's the money they're using to start these businesses and different things. And for us, it's like, man, if my folks would have taken out a life insurance policy like that I could access at any time, and I had money and I had that capital to where I could build something, instead of having to go through these hoops, like those are things that change our lives. And so, I'm just, like I said, there's just so much that I'm absorbing, and it's a lot, but it's a good lot, because again, like when we talk about, generational wealth and changing the generations, like if I don't understand what I'm passing down, my daughter's going to have to take time to actually learn and get it, and the more that I learn, the more time I'm saving her. And that's the way that I look at it.
There's two things with African Americans, and some people have to understand that some African Americans in this nation still to this day are afraid.
Yeah.
They're still afraid to share their voice. They're still afraid to share their narrative. They're still afraid to share the injustices that they face or have seen. And when people like to say all lives matter, you're right, because all lives are Black lives as well. And it shouldn't make you uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it's so true. And I think that's the part, because I mean, I'll be honest, I can't tell you how many times, my mother will call me and just make sure you're being safe. Just make sure you're doing this. Make sure you do. And it's almost like, it's so uncomfortable for them. But the reality is this is what it takes to create the space that our children need. Like for me right now, it's so funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she lives in Canada. She's working on PR up there. And she said, I was trying to figure out when you went like super like left field with this, like not in a bad way, but you just like I'm putting up with none of this. And she was like, it was after your daughter came. And she was like, it seemed like, she was like, me understanding that moment has totally put you in a complete context right now. And there were a lot of things that I tolerated, just because everything that I did was politicized. You know what I'm saying? I think that everything that Black people do is politicized, and we put it in this political ring, and all these games are played with it. But that's why I keep saying this is about the value of life. And when I think about my daughter, I want to ensure that her life is valued. The fact that it's not that, she's just a girl and a woman, but she's a Black girl and she's going to be a Black woman. And I'm not trying to create, a divide, but I also understand that Black women have a different battle than most other women here in the U.S. And so, and a battle that's unique to them because of the history of how we got here and how we got to where we are right now. And so I think that, again, we've really got to start to understand this stuff in context. And I think what I get my inspiration from is just being around folks like, Fred Gray, who was the attorney for Dr. King and Rosa Parks, and seeing what he did in the civil rights movement, being around Charles Person, being around people that I know have been instrumental in that fight for equality, and seeing the strength that they needed, seeing how they kept themselves inspired and motivated and what they were able to do. Like, those are the things for me that really keep me going.
Dontaye, we thank you for your commitment to the community. your commitment to sharing stories so that people can learn more about what's going on around them. I thank you for coming to the Crown and Purpose podcast today. So before we leave this place, I always have my guests share one Bible verse or one inspirational quote that will keep the listeners motivated through the week, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of keeps me motivated is Matthew 25:34. And it says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the king prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Like, everything I'm doing right now, it's part of that journey, that faith journey, walking in purpose. I'm doing it for God. And it just keeps me going.
Amen. I appreciate you. As always, I thank you for coming on today. You guys, please stay connected with Dontaye and Carter Media Group. And again, you guys, grab your crown and walk in purpose. You guys have a blessed week and we'll talk soon.